we have a fun one today because today we're talking about how the content you're not writing is the silent killer of sales. And so, if you've been around us or Impact for, any amount of time, you're probably familiar with this topic. But for those of you who are new, let's like set the stage and back up a little bit. So as Zach just mentioned, right, the premise of this show is just based on the fact that the way people buy has changed. And regardless of this fact, most companies still won't change the way they market and sell. And the truth is, and where the name of our show comes from, is all of them are thinking, but we're different. And this mindset is essentially saying that the changes that are happening around us don't apply to us. Our buyers are different. And so this is the thing that keeps most companies, the B2B, the B2C, the B2G, to the B2B2C, the D2C, from adapting to changes in the marketplace. And so when most people first hear this, but we're different thing, they usually reject the idea and they actually just end up embracing this thing we call ostrich marketing. And we call it that because, like the ostrich, we try to ignore the things that we don't really want to face. We try to ignore the changes that are happening around us. We stick our head in the sand. And we know the ostrich head in the sand thing is a myth, but let's just roll with it. And so what ends up happening is that we hide from the things that are most important to our buyers, the things we're not talking about. And instead of addressing the fears, the issues, worries, concerns, and doubts that our buyers have, we hide our heads in the sand. So let's take a moment, right? Think about how many questions your customers ask every single day and how many of those you've answered on your website. Now, if you're being honest with yourself, probably not as many as they'd like. So if you're hiding from the issues your customers bring up, and if you ignore people's most important questions about your business, you're probably an ostrich marketer. So this thing we call ostrich marketing, it's going to continue to be a problem because as long as people have questions about your business, they'll also have doubts about working with you. So after all, right, we know that people want to work with companies that they trust. But why would someone trust a company that doesn't sell in the way that they want to buy? Why trust a company that doesn't answer any of their questions? And Zach, when it comes to winning people's trust, answering potential customers' questions is the best way to do it. We've done this for ourselves. We teach this to clients, and we've seen this work for hundreds of businesses that we've taught it to. We even teach it to companies so that they can bring it to more businesses because of how effective it is. And so if you're willing to accept the fact that your buyers are no different than you or I, and if you face their questions or concerns, fears, issues, worries head on, you can shatter this defeating mindset. You can become a trusted voice in your space. And the whole point of doing this is to grow your business.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the premise. There's a lot to wrap your arms around. So today, Zach, the first thing that I want to get to, I think is probably the question on anyone's mind when they first hear this, is like, this sounds easy. Just give people the information that they need. So Zach, why do so many companies struggle with this?
Great question. Wish I had the perfect answer, but this is oftentimes what I see or what I think happens for us. Because we could hear and we could agree with, yeah, Nick, I want to be trusted. And of course, I understand the value of answering customers' questions, and then this is where the but we're different mindset comes in. And the problem is for us as organizations, what we want to have is the upper hand. In fact, we were kind of taught that for many, many years, is that when it comes to dealing with customers, like, you should retain the upper hand of a negotiation and you're the one that's in the driver's seat. But the buyer has fundamentally changed. We've all changed in the past 10, 20, 30 years, whatever you want to call it, where we can't have the upper hand. We want to be in the driver's seat. We don't have to rely on one single company. We don't have to rely on a salesperson in order to make a good decision. We can do these things on our own. And so we have this natural inclination to want to be in the driver's seat as the customer. Yet this causes tension within our thought process in terms of how do we market? How do we position ourselves? How do we sell? And the choosing Ostrich marketing isn't necessarily sitting down and going, you know what, I don't want to address these many, many things. It's way more nuanced than that. It's okay, yeah, we know we need to talk about cost and price, but there's no real good way to do it. Like, it could be more confusing than it would be clearing anything up. So let's just not worry about that right now.
Or we could scare people away.
Or yeah, right. So bad things could happen by us being very open, right? So that could be the natural inclination. You know, a really great example of this, Nick, we talk about this in the book, is CarMax. CarMax, as the largest now buyer and seller of used cars in America, perhaps the world, I'm not sure. How did they achieve that position? Because they recognize there's fundamental things that the car buyer wants that they're not getting. They don't want to leave the lot with a lemon. They don't want to drive off the lot and then regret the car that they bought. And they don't want to haggle. I would venture to guess that any used car dealer anywhere in the world would say, yeah, of course, these are the three, like, they know these things about us as car buyers. Yet it seems too daunting to do anything about it, right? We could lose the upper hand if we're not able to haggle, right? We could really cut into our margins if we allow people just to bring the car back within, 7 or 10 days or whatever, right? It's too big of a risk. Yet CarMax became the leader in selling used cars because they were willing to call out those bad practices and address them. So how does this apply to our marketing? What do people want from your marketing? They want things at the time that they want it. They want it fast, right? I want to be able to find cost and price information fast. I want to know who the competitors are, what the other options are fast. I want to know what my best options are. I want to know that stuff fast. We can't be the ostrich that buries our head in the sand, and that's a choice.
Not only, I think this shows up in a place where most marketers that I've talked with, they don't necessarily they're not very cognizant of this struggle. They think marketers tend to suffer from the curse of knowledge, right? Like, it's pretty, all the things that you deal with in the day-to-day, you're so close to the thing that you do, the thing that you market and sell, that it all feels pretty obvious to you. Why would we don't need to create content about this thing. It's pretty basic information. It's 101 stuff about buying from us or using our tool or using our, or buying our service. And that is where most of this stuff really starts. It doesn't have to be this huge, this extremely advanced thing. And we always end up kind of going in that direction when it comes to when we try to tackle this. It's like, let's just cover the basics. How does this compare to the other thing that I'm looking at? What are the potential problems or drawbacks with this thing, right? These are things that people don't want to address, but these are the things that people who are considering a purchase want to know. So let's talk about the problem that ostrich marketing creates. And I call this the trust gap, right? And it's basically this idea that there's how much trust a buyer has in your business currently, and there's how much trust a buyer needs in your business to actually complete a purchase from, right? There's that gap. And it's the things that we do as marketers and salespeople to close that gap, right? You use the analogy, like, move the boat closer to the dock so that the buyer's willing to take the leap. If that boat's too far from the dock, the buyer's you're not going to take the risk. You're not going to take the chance and do it. There's too many things that are unknown, and there's way easier things that you could do than take a risk on a purchase, right? So this problem that ostrich marketing creates, this trust gap, right? Like, how does this, like this, there's a ripple effect here. And the problem ranges from, direct issues that you suffer from, longer sales cycles, unqualified leads. And then there's the indirect things, right? No word of mouth, or just very low word of mouth. So, right, the flywheel effect that just, you can't quite get off the ground as well. So there's a few different things here going on. Zach, what do you think is kind of like the biggest problem that this creates for businesses?
Well, I want to back up here a second too and say that the trust gap doesn't just apply in somebody wanting to buy something from you, right? Of course, that like as a macro or like overarching thing, yes. But what about all the other smaller touch points that require trust? Like, to what degree does somebody need to trust you to fill out a form on your website? To what degree does somebody need to trust you to meet with one of your sales reps? To what degree does somebody need to trust you just to walk into your store? All right. There's a gap that exists there too. The sad part is for a lot of companies I talk to, we start talking about trust and would you want to be, if you could be the most trusted voice in your space, digitally speaking, would you want to be? And Nick, so many people that I talk to will say, well, we do a really great job. Our people do trust us. But you dig a little bit deeper and it's, okay, your customers that you work with right now trust you. Okay, so you have a good product, you have a good service. But how well are you generating trust with the people who don't know you? Too many marketing programs are dictated by branding versus marketing. In other words, a marketing team might think, okay, our job is to help people feel a certain way about our company, and that's gonna help us move the needle here. But you can't start teaching somebody how to feel a certain way about a brand until they know who you are, until you're part of the conversation. Right? So when we go back to what is the trust gap here, if you were to imagine one of your prospects having that digital journey with you, I don't care if it's social media or on your website or whatever, they're going through that digital journey, their own digital buying process. And there was a little gauge above their head, which is the trust gauge. All right. And they're consuming information on your website, or they're consuming your social media stuff, whatever. What's happening with that trust gauge? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it staying the same? For too many of us, I'm telling you, the needle's not moving. No matter how well you talk about yourself and what you do and how great you are, that needle's not actually moving until we finally give them something that they go, this is exactly what I've been looking for. Finally, I have an answer. It's exactly what I needed. Wow, I wish more companies would talk about it like this. Wow, I can't afford not to meet with one of these sales reps. Look at all of this great information they've already given me. That's how we start to close that gap. I love the analogy, Nick, of having to make a leap from the boat to the dock, because it is that leap. And I think there's a series of leaps that have to happen. And we have to audit what really, when we're saying being the most trusted voice, right? Or earning trust within that 80% of the buying decision that we actually don't even get to talk to them. We have to be willing to forego our own way of doing things, the things that we'd love to talk about, the things that we'd like doing, and go, what do they really need to trust us to do that thing, whatever it might be.
I'm glad you brought up the 0 moment of truth, because that's where I was going to go with this, right? So for those of you who don't know, there's a study that was done. I don't have it in front of me. But basically the conclusion was that 80% of the buying decision was made before the business ever knew the prospect existed. This isn't before they talk to sales. This is existing. And that two things can be true at once, right? So they can fill out a form on your website and they exist. They can raise your hand to talk to sales. They can walk into your store, right? So there's 80% of the decision to make a purchase has been made before you know this person exists. And too often businesses aren't thinking about how do we intentionally get to 80%, right? Like there's a series of, there's a list of information. There's like a bunch of things that people need to know in order to get to 80%. It's different for every business, but 80% tends to be true across the board before someone's willing and comfortable to make a decision. And so everyone's kind of focused on, oh, well, we know they exist, and we assume immediately that they're at the top of the funnel. In that analogy, it's like they are completely unaware, and they've never consumed a single thing until we just figured out that they exist, and only the things we send them by email are the things that they're going to consume, and only the things that we post to our website are the things that they're going to consume, and the things that we can track. And reality is that 80%, so right with this study, it shows 80% of the things that buyers consume in order to make a decision are completely untrackable. You don't know where it is, where it's happening, or what they're doing unless you ask them, right? But at large, there's no cookies telling you all these things have happened, and it could take months, years for some people. So it's an interesting way to position. How do you prioritize the things that you focus on in order to achieve these certain milestones to be able to grow your business, right? So Ostrich marketing creates the trust gap, right? Or the trust gap is basically a problem that manifests itself outside of Ostrich marketing, right? So what are things, Zach, that companies can, what are the main things that companies ignore that also create this problem, right? Because we talked about the content you don't write, is it killing your sales? What are some of those things?
Yeah, for anybody who has heard of our big five, this is going to sound familiar to you, but I'll take this a step deeper in talking about the big five as well, because we have found there's five major categories of concerns and questions that people have when they're getting ready to make a decision. And that, by the way, means you and I. When we're getting ready to spend our money, there's basically five things that we really obsess over and want to know on the front end. Yet the great kind of paradox about this is that these are the five things we want to know, we obsess over, yet they're the five things that companies don't like to address. So it's a paradox. First of these is cost and price, right? You and I want to have a good sense as to what we might spend, what we should spend, what would be too much, what would be too little. We want to know these things on the front end. Yet most businesses say we can't talk openly and honestly about cost and price. We want to know about problems. Not only why am I experiencing the X problem, but also what are problems with this thing that I might buy, right? Let's say you're buying a new, a vacuum cleaner, right? You want to be familiar with what are the general problems with this type of vacuum cleaner, not because I'm not going to buy it, but because I want to know that before I invest in it. This applies to B2B as well. What are the types of problems that arise from certain types of services, right? So I can prepare for it, be ready for it. The next thing is comparisons and versus. Anything that's comparing something. You and I, we love to compare stuff. That's why we love Amazon. We can look at so many different things all real quick, right? We do the same thing in B2B when we're looking at services, right? We want to know, how does this service stack up to that service? How does this company stack up to that company? We want to know these things. Yet most companies, they don't like to compare stuff, especially if they're comparing it to something that somebody else makes or does. Fourth in the big five, we've got best of or best in class. If I were to do a poll right now, if everybody's listening to this and I were to say, in the last 30 days, when you were getting ready to buy something, what was the first thing that you searched for? I bet a majority of us would say we searched for best blank, something, right? Best vacuum cleaner, best payroll company in my area, best, steak in my area. You know what I'm saying? We want to know the best. We don't always buy the best. We don't always utilize the best, but we at least want to know what it is. Nowadays, we actually get more specific. What's the best blank for this, for me? Right? We want to get it more personalized. Yet again, a lot of companies, they don't like to do best of type of content, especially if they're not the best in a given category. And finally, in the big five, we've got reviews. We want to see real, unbiased reviews of the thing so that we can almost experience it beforehand and we don't have remorse. We want to feel like we've gone through the proper logic. We want to feel like we've checked the proper boxes. So we've got cost and price, problems, comparisons, best of, and reviews. Those are what we call the big five. Again, these are the ones that most businesses don't like to address. Here's the beautiful thing. What we found is that if you were to only focus on these five, you would move the needle in big ways. In fact, in my 5-6 years of specializing in They Ask You Answer specifically, working with content writers, videographers, and teams that were producing content, the big five, almost 99% of the time, the top performing stuff is the big five. Generally speaking, it's cost and price content and it's problems or negatives. Yet those are the two that most companies don't want to talk about. You want to talk about closing the trust gap? Just be the one that's willing to do the thing that nobody else will do. Talk about cost and price in a way that nobody's ever addressed it before. Talk about problems with the industry or problems with your product or service or whatever it is. Help prepare people for those types of things. You might not be ignoring those things intentionally, but your customer knows you know the answers to those things. And if you have the ability to address them, you should do it. I'm not saying you can always give an answer, not saying you could always say, so for any guy named Nick who's reading this article, it's probably going to cost you X. Right? You're probably not going to be able to get that specific. But can you address the question? Could I talk about in content something that Nick would be able to read and he'd go, that's me, right? So if you're experiencing X, Y, and Z and you're looking for this and that, you're probably going to fall in this range. Nick already feels like I just wrote that for him because I made it specific. I addressed the question. That's what so many of us need to do, is we just need to get better at addressing it. That's pulling our head out of the sand. It's not having the perfect answer for everything. It's just being willing to address it.
Totally. And this shows up in like high ticket retail, like businesses, a lot, professional services. B2B suffers from this more than anybody else in the world. B2C is pretty 10 years ahead of B2B on everything. It's not a huge problem in B2C, but in B2B, for some reason, businesses tend to think that if we just withhold pricing, we can get more conversations with our salespeople. And if you ask any of your salespeople who talk with a prospect who, I just need a price, I'm just looking for a range. Any of those people, they hate talking to those people because those deals, if there is an opportunity there, it takes 10 times longer to close. This is statistically verifiable. Like, it takes significantly longer to close those deals because they're nowhere near ready to have an actual sales conversation. They're not in buying mode.
I saw a meme the other day that had, it was like the gas station sign, right? Where we, obviously any gas station you drive by, you can see a price right there. But rather than a price, it said call for pricing, right? And it's like, I was laughing about that, but also it's just like, yeah, duh. Like, this is how obvious that really is, right? If you're at an intersection, you got a gas station across the street that has the price, and another one says call for pricing, which one are you going to go to? Because that one already gave you the answer, right? You gave you what you want, it gave it to you fast. I'd venture to guess that you wouldn't even be interested, even if it was cheaper, the one that you had to go in and talk to the people to get what the price was, right? It's like, you'd be willing to pay more because it's easy for you. But that's laughable. But that's also what folks like me see when I see companies not talking about price. And they're like, but Zach, we have to know more. It's like, no, you don't, right? You can at least address it. You don't have to put up a price list. You don't have to put up a price list, but you do have to at least talk about it.
Yeah, and for these super customized solutions, like you're selling boats, you're selling professional services, you're selling highly technical work or skilled work, things like that. Those are the types of things where the buyer doesn't even care if you can give them the exact price. They want to know, what am I looking at here? And they want to know, what are the things that are going to make this more expensive? What are the things that are going to help me keep the cost down? Just because the salesperson has the ability to explain things to people face to face or on a Zoom call or whatever the situation is, isn't going to make them have more money. I think there's this like concept in B2B, especially, that, you know, if we can make a really high value case for the thing that we do, the prospect can find more money. I think this has been true maybe a couple of times in all of history, that someone can go back and be like, you know what, this is a bigger problem and we should throw more money at it. But the reality is that most businesses don't just have unlimited funds to throw at it. And if they value the solution enough upfront, they'll be able to go back very early on, go through due diligence, go through finance, go through legal, all the things that they need to do to be able to say, hey, guess what? It's not going to actually cost us X to solve this problem. It's actually going to cost us Y. So we need to figure out what we need to do in order to be able to invest Y in solving this problem.
Yeah.
And then when they get to sales,
if you do this right, you can reorient their thinking. That's absolutely true. Another example of this, of being the Ostrich. I worked with a company recently in the past couple of years, and I helped them recruit truck drivers, a big logistics company. And as I started working with them, I started to notice that there was a lot of buzz about their process of recruiting. Like, people leave comments on their YouTube videos and stuff and say like, hey, stay away from this company. They do this thing. And I didn't really understand what the thing was. Turns out what the thing was these front-facing dash cameras that this company will put in the trucks that these drivers are in. And it was like a bunch of people, it was like hate mail coming in and all their stuff. And I'm like, guys, what is going on with this? And they're like, yeah, you know, we have these cameras that we put in, and they're a safety measure that makes sure that if the driver does anything that's unsafe, it basically will like take a video clip of it. It will send it to us, and, you know, we can deal with that. Which, by the way, praise God that we're doing stuff like that. It's good that we're keeping us safe on the road. I didn't know that they even had things like that. They also have ones that face the driver. It's amazing. But they weren't addressing this on their website, right? They're trying to attract all these new drivers to come and drive for them, yet they're not addressing the very thing that is pushing them away, which is these dash cameras. So here's what they did. They started talking about it. They just started producing content. Why would we have a front-facing dash camera? What's perhaps the benefit of us having these cameras? They pulled in a real driver. They got his testimonial about these things. Hey, I had an experience where I did an unsafe maneuver, and you know, I had to have a conversation about it. But ultimately, I'm glad that it happened because it made me a better driver. But again, they had the option to address this or not. And before they were not addressing it, then they started to address it. And guess what? The power, we took the power away from the problem solely by talking about the thing, addressing the elephant in the room. Even as I tell that story, I'm hoping you are thinking to yourself about that elephant that you still have not addressed. And the fact that you're not talking about it is what is causing the trust gap for you. You can't always take a problem and turn it into a positive. But not addressing the thing gives the power more problem than it needs. So I don't care if it's cost or price or a negative with your service or even negative reviews. I've worked with companies that have a lot of negative reviews. Guess how they respond to that? They make content about the fact that they have negative reviews and how they've done things to improve every single time that they've got a review. And so now you've got a superior product because of those negative reviews. That's taking the power from the problem. And that's the difference between thinking like a business versus thinking like a buyer, right? That's how you pull your head out of the sand. You're not the ostrich anymore.
I'm happy you brought up reviews because that's probably not only some of the most engaging content, but like anytime you look at reviews as a consumer, whether you're buying something for your business or for yourself, you're going through reviews, and I don't care how good or bad a review is. I'm looking more at how the business replied to the review. And if they're ignoring every review, it's like, I probably don't want to do business with them because they seem to really not care much or about how their buyers feel about working with them.
Cool thing to add to this, Nick.
Yeah.
So I've looked at some studies lately that actually show that organizations that put not necessarily a negative review and not necessarily a positive review, but something that's in the middle, when they put those types of things out in front, people spend more time on websites like that. And if you have negative reviews that people can access quickly, they'll spend even more time because, which by the way, why would anybody spend time reading through a bunch of negative reviews? It's because you are for yourself trying to figure out, is this really a problem? Have you ever read a negative review before and you're like, it sounds like they're the problem. Like it sounds like the reviewer is the problem. You ever had that experience before? I know I do all the time. All the time.
You ever go apartment hunting? Back in the day when I was looking for apartments, that was the number one thing. You're like, like management sucks, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, I think that you destroyed your apartment and you're mad about that they charged you for whatever it is. So it shows up.
That's right. But again, this is a trend that we're seeing. We as buyers, we actually spend more time with the negatives, and we're okay. We're sometimes okay with the negatives. We just want to know what they are. And that's more powerful. People spend more time with it than us just putting a bunch of great stuff, a bunch of 5 stars, a bunch of this, the most perfect thing ever. We get to that real stuff, the mid-level and the negatives. People engage with it more, and it actually closes the trust gap versus widening it. I mean, it's really incredible to look at these studies. It's encouraging to see that.
I've seen a lot of content lately, people talking about this, is the 3-star review is probably more powerful than the 5-star review because people feel its authenticity is significantly higher than a 5-star review that says everything is awesome all the time. So 3-star reviews, I mean, I know when I look at reviews, right, like people are also only really motivated to leave a review if they're super happy or they're super mad. And so if you look at the curve on any chart, review chart, you can see it. There's only a lot of 5s, a lot of 1s, very few in between. Those are the ones where you're going to get the reality. Yeah, this thing's pretty good. Does whatever it is. Like you're going to get the raw truth there.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Nick. How many reviews have you left in your lifetime?
A handful. not a ton.
Like 4 or 5 maybe?
Probably, yeah. And only when I'm really happy or really
Yeah.
mad.
This is totally off topic, but I've always been so interested in this because I've asked a fair amount of people over the years, like, how often do you leave reviews?
Who's
And
doing this?
I've never, dude, that's my question. Who's leaving all these reviews?
You know who I've read a lot lately that people, Amazon sellers and stuff like that, they're buying batched reviews. Like,
Yeah.
that's why the verified buyer stuff is so important.
So this is actually a good kind of segue here. This is why we as organizations actually need to get good at reviewing things ourselves. Now, you could approach somebody with that and go, you need to talk more about your products. You need to do your own unbiased reviews. And they'd say, well, nobody wants to hear from us. Well, but hang on, what makes you say that? Why wouldn't they want to hear from you? And you might say, well, because we sell the things that we're obviously going to be biased. Okay, so is it possible you could do it in such a way that it's clearly not biased? Is it possible? Of course, the answer is yes. Okay, so what would we have to do to make it really come across as unbiased? Well, we have to talk about both the pros and the cons. We'd actually have to demonstrate our subject matter expertise by saying, you know what, this particular product or service is not great in these certain areas. If you stack it up to others, it really excels in these areas. So if you're X, Y, or Z, this is going to be a great fit. If you're A, B, or C, might not be a great fit. Those are the types of things that would actually allow us as organizations to review things. I think it's going to be way more important going forward than it's even been in the past because of what you're saying, Nick, right? We've got this like proliferation of reviews that are actually paid for. We as consumers, as buyers, we can't actually verify if these reviews are done by a real human or not. So they're not going to mean as much as they did in the past. So we have to be able to say, can we do this ourselves and do it in a way that actually builds trust?
Reviews are an interesting one too, because everyone hears reviews and they're like, well, how am I supposed to, I make a product, how am I supposed to just look at this product and be totally unbiased about that? Reviews are not this one-sided, right? Do you remodel kitchens? You can go through and review a kitchen you just finished. Hey, this person picked this backsplash. This person did this countertop. Let's review the work and the craftsmanship of of what we did for this homeowner.
Yeah. You know, Vacuum Wars?
I love Vacuum Wars. He's a great example of how he has hundreds of thousands of views. I think probably in the millions of views. It's freaking vacuum.
Really impressive. It's really impressive. If y'all are listening to this and you haven't checked out Vacuum Wars on YouTube, this is somebody who understands how to earn trust and credibility. So as far as I can tell, the channel doesn't actually sell any sort of vacuums. They just review them. But the length and depth of the review is really impressive. I mean, they put these like, you know, smart vacuums and robot vacuums through the ringer. He's designed all these different types of tests. Here's the test of where we, you know, dumped a whole box of Cheerios on the ground and let's see what it did. Or like, here's the carpet test, or here's the, you know,
pet hair test. That was
right.
I got my vacuum because of his pet hair test.
This is what I'm saying, right? So in that moment, you had full confidence and full trust, at least in the product, because you felt like, I've seen everything I need to see here. This is for me. So again, the ability, we as product manufacturers or service deliverers, because we let's actually embrace the fact that we have the curse of knowledge. What are the tests and the things that we could show that the buyer or consumer would either never think to test, or they wouldn't have the ability to actually do a proper evaluation, but we could do it. That's how you earn the trust, right? By being the ones willing to say, you want to make a good decision here. We're going to make sure you make a good decision because we know these things. Like, we know this industry, we know these services, we know these products. Here's a review based on what we found with our thing, with their thing, with everybody's thing, whatever it is. Vacuum Wars.
Vacuum Wars. We're not sponsored by Vacuum Wars, by the way. So,
but I mean, if they want to,
if they want to,
I'll sit here.
So one more thing I'll review, because I think this is probably one of the places most people we work with get stuck, but I think this is important. So like, when you go to Google and you type in, you know, product, solution, service, whatever, review, and you hit the space bar, one of the first things, at least for me, and I've tested this in a bunch of different environments, mobile, desktop, like regular browser, incognito, you hit space, it's going to immediately say Reddit. And Reddit is where the authentic reviews are for 99% of the things, like any category that people are looking to purchase. Most people are reviewing things in Reddit, and most people are now going to Reddit to consume those reviews because they don't feel like they're finding unbiased, trustworthy information anywhere else. And so this behavior is not because, like, Reddit's been around forever, or for a very long time at this point. It's not like Reddit's this new hot place that everyone wants to be. It's because people haven't been able to find information on the thing anywhere else, and now they're turning to a place where it's happening, right? And now Google search results, even if you don't add Reddit, I've seen search results even show me light boxes or like snippet boxes that have Reddit threads built in, and you can click the little caret and it'll drop down and give you the whole thread right in the search engine, so you don't have to leave. So understand that these are like the mechanics of the way that people are searching for things and consuming this information, right? It's happening, and it's not necessarily only happening in the places that are very obvious. So I think it's important, if you do sell a thing that is highly reviewed, go check out Reddit, look at the way that people talk about things. One, this is a ton of inspiration for content. This is the way that people truly feel about it, and they're having conversations about it, about your thing. Also, there are plenty of companies, especially in software. We see in B2B, a ton of companies. Someone will just go in there and say, hey, guess what? I work for this company, and like, here's my take on it. They're not the corporate mouthpiece. They're as a real human doing the real thing, talking about their experience and like whatever, right? The verifying or validating the claims that they make or whatever the thing is.
Yeah, I have a story about this actually. So it's about Reddit actually, because if I'm being honest, I'm sure other people felt this way too. I never really understood Reddit. I didn't really like know how to use it, and I thought it was kind of just for like another community of people that was not me. So I never really used it until I did realize what you're saying, Nick. It's actually a good place to get some sort of information. So a quick story here. I was preparing to buy tickets for a race event, a Formula One race event is happening later this year, and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to buy the tickets and have my group go. And on the app that I was using, I forget exactly what the app was, but it kind of a little bit showed you what the view was like from the seat, but it didn't really show you everything. And I was trying to figure out, would a general admission be better, or should I buy a seat in the bleachers, whatever? But I couldn't find the answer to these questions. So I actually went to Reddit and I searched for, what's better at this particular raceway, general admission or bleachers. I found a Reddit thread. Now get this. Within the thread, a ton of people who are clearly experts on this thing know way more about that racetrack than I would ever know. There's pictures in there. There's stories in there from people who say, 1 year I did the bleachers, 1 year I did this, and here was my experience. Like this massive collection, this is the exact answer that I was looking for. Now, here's the principle there, right? Here's the principle. That app that I was using to try and purchase these tickets, it got me pretty close, right? I think they should perhaps be proud of what they're showing on there. I could at least see what their view was like from this, but it didn't go as far as to give me the stories that I wanted to see. It didn't show me real pictures of people what their actual view was like. They hadn't gone far enough, and I had to turn to Reddit to close the trust gap for me. So that's really our job as businesses, right? To audit and go, okay, there's probably things we're doing really well right now. We might actually be addressing a lot of these things that Zach and Nick have already talked about, but we haven't closed the gap completely yet. What are we missing? Do we need more stories? Do we need more pictures? Do we need whatever it might be, right? What is going to get them to 100%? Remember, that gauge is over that person's head, right? Is it helping us build a tremendous amount of trust? Is it taking away, or is it just staying stagnant? For so many of us, it's staying stagnant. We can do better.
Totally. So I think we beat up the problem a lot in all the different ways that we're not delivering. But that's a lot of stuff. So let's.
The first step is always admitting you have a problem, Nick.
That's true. That's step one.
Yes.
So I think there's three main ways to address this, right? And it's not just, there's an aspect of it's like, hey, let's just do the tactical things, right? Part of addressing this problem is tactical. And we need to sit down and write the thing. We need to interview the subject matter expert. We need to publish this content so that people who are looking to buy what we sell have information that addresses their fears, issues, worries, all the things. Right. So there's one way to start. It's probably the primary way that every single person who wants to address this is going to start. But there's also an aspect of this that is cultural, right? If your company does not want to become the greatest teacher in your category, Marcus always uses the analogy, to be the WebMD. If you Google anything medical, WebMD is the first thing that's showing up guaranteed every time, right? If you want to be that resource for all things in your category, that's a decision you make as a business. That's a business level strategy that changes the way that your marketers go to market. That changes the way that your sales team sells. They're no longer pitch. They are teachers. They are educators. They use the content that marketing creates to teach people who are looking to buy what you have. And so there's this aspect of the problem. And there's one final aspect of the problem, which is just logistical. Do you have the right people? And are they in the right seats, right? Do you have a writer? Do you have someone that can film and edit video for you? Things like that. So where do you start? Where would you start, Zach?
Well, so put the problem into perspective. If we really want to be known or become known in a marketplace, we have to think about marketing, not just about branding. So logos, website, user experience, all these things, brand it cool. But if we really want to be a powerhouse in the market, we have to be leading the conversations. Why not be the one that's leading the conversations around what buyers care about when they're making a buying decision, right? So let's put that in perspective. And then depending on the size of your operation, if you have a 3-person company, you're probably not going to go hire a whole content team to come in. What you're probably going to do is you're going to say, okay, between the 3 of us, we can start making some content today. We can make videos. We can make social media posts. We can write some articles. Let's figure out how to scale ourselves by just addressing the questions that we hear all the time. Now, if you're a 50 million, 500 million, billion-dollar organization, okay, you're probably not going to want the CEO to sit down and start writing content. You're going to hire a team, all right? You're going to figure out, again, how do we scale what we have here? A bunch of really smart people who answer questions and deal with customers all day. How can we make that even more scalable and allow our customers to get those answers and to have that same experience without even having to talk to us? Okay, so yeah, whatever. Start the cultural shift. Get the team in place. Start doing the tactics and whatever. But like Nick is saying, it starts with, do we want to be the ones that are leading the discussions for our customers when they have these questions? The big 5 ain't going anywhere. So like, make a conscious choice yourself. Do we want to be the ones that when anybody has a question about the cost and price of our type of product or our types of service, that we're the ones that are leading that conversation? When anybody wants to know, what are the problems with this, do we want to be the ones that are leading and having that conversation? And so on and so forth, because if we are the ones that are leading the conversation, for so many of those folks, they're going to want to do business with us because they trust us. That's the beautiful thing, right?
It is a beautiful thing. And I think like there's this small little hurdle that people tend to get stuck at, which is just like, what is like the first tangible step that just feels totally useful? And it's like, talk to your salespeople. They can ask questions.
Ask them this. So this is great. Ask them this. What's a question that you hate answering? In fact, when you hear it, you go, oh, I was really hoping you wouldn't ask that.
Or they're not ready to buy.
Yeah. Or immediately indicates to you that person is nowhere near ready to buy. Like for instance, if I'm selling pools, right? If they say, what's the difference between like one of those like plastic looking pools versus like the ones that like a concrete pool? Okay, if you hear that as somebody selling pools, you're saying to yourself, this person has no freaking idea what they're doing, right? They're asking pretty elementary questions. Cool. That's where we should start, right? Let's answer some of those elementary things, the things that we already talk about every single day. And I would say the ones that make us cringe are oftentimes the exact ones that we need to address. those ones that we are hoping they don't ask at all, those ones that for a large portion of your sellers, they probably don't actually address the thing well. Those are the ones that are going to build the most trust. It's like I talked about earlier. Take a problem and take the power away from the problem. That's the stuff we really need to be addressing. That's where I would tell you to start. Do the stuff that's painful first. Don't do the stuff that's easy. Everyone wants to start with easy stuff. Yet the easy stuff isn't what moves the needle. As I talked about earlier, for most of the clients I've worked with, cost and price and problems are the two top performing pieces of content. They generate the most amount of sales appointments. A specific example of this, Sheffield Metals, metal roofing manufacturer, their highest performing piece of content is 7 problems with metal roofs. They're attracting a huge portion of the market by talking about the problems with their stuff. That wasn't easy for them to do. They didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, we need to start talking more about the negatives with our stuff. But once they chose it, they said, it's hard, but we're going to do it. That's the thing that's made such a big difference for them. It's beautiful, and anybody can do it.
I call this trust-led growth. It's the intentional, like you said, it's the intentional decision. They've made the decision to focus on closing the trust gap as a means to grow in the business. And it's proven, like you said, like when you take this lens and you focus on these things and you address the things that are important to buyers, right? We are not being ostrich marketers. What's the antithesis of ostrich marketer? When we focused on those things, this is a trust-led growth strategy. You are prioritizing this as your means to go into market and as your means of attracting buyers and doing business. It's a powerful thing, man. It really is.
Powerful stuff.
All right, man. We've beat this topic up, so I'm sure there's a few questions. Nicole, are there any questions either in the chat or that you got a DM that you think we should address before we go today?
Yeah, I have one that came in as like an anonymous DM. So somebody was asking, what does this mean for the future of my sales team? And I think to clarify that a little bit, and please, whoever asked it, you can come off mute if you want to have a dialogue with Zach, but what does this mean in terms of the future for my sales team if, they're getting all the information ahead of time? Can they still put like their sales magic on the thing if they're getting all this information beforehand?
Great question. Here's what it means for the future of the sellers. They're going to spend less time with prospects that aren't qualified to buy the thing anyways. They're going to deal with prospects who are more educated, more bought in, and more trusting than they worked with before. They're going to be more cherished for what they can bring to the sales process because rather than having to do a bunch of teaching, they can actually guide people through the buying process. And these sellers are going to love their jobs a whole lot more because they're not going to feel like that salesy, smarmy, manipulative salesperson that they don't want to be anyways. They're really going to feel like they're guiding people and changing people's lives. Now, why do I say those things? Because that's exactly what happens for so many of the sales teams that we have trained and work alongside a marketing team that's doing everything that we've discussed here today. The scalability of sales teams becomes much easier as well when you're doing inbound marketing so well. When you can really see how the inputs that you've got bring in customers, what they're most interested in, what actually shortens the sales cycle. Therefore, you can arm the sellers with the right things to sell quickly. When you can do all these things, you make smarter decisions in terms of how you want to staff your sales team and how big you should staff your sales team. We've not had that type of clarity in years prior. We haven't had that type of clarity. In fact, that's why marketing for so long has been viewed as an expense and sales as a revenue driver versus them both just being revenue drivers. So really, really great question. And let me just real quick, I think the concern perhaps in just the languaging of the question Is the concern that sales will no longer be needed if we do a really great job of addressing everything on the front end? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They just changed their role from having to convince and teach and convert to becoming more of a service provider, a consultative seller within the sales process versus somebody who's trying to, convince or persuade. Great question.
So I just got one here that said, are there other ways besides blog articles to address the big five?
1,000%. I mean, the one thing about saying articles is like, I think for some people, it just goes to like their mind goes to that wasted space on the website that's called blog that no customers actually go to. And you and I don't really go to that thing either. That's what our mind goes to. A blog article is nothing more than a formatted page on your website. That's all it really is. And so you could just say an article is just a page on your website that addresses something. Now, to the degree that you can get people to that answer at the right time is really where you're going to see the difference. Okay. So a blog article is just a piece of content. A video is just a piece of content. There are many ways to produce content, and I could talk about that for a whole hour. But our question should be, when it comes to the concern or the fear or the doubt, the worry, the question, whatever it is, what's going to be our best way to address that for our customers? What's their preferred method of receiving this information? Could be a podcast for you, for all I know. But we want to teach in a way that people prefer to learn and deliver it in such a way that they prefer to consume it. And it could be many, many, many different things.
The big five is a system, or it's the framework, right? It just spells out exactly what people want to know. It's up to you to figure out how your buyers want to consume it. So distribution totally matters here. The blog article is a means of distribution. And what that means in reality is that Google, right? Like the blog article's role is to show up in a Google search engine results page and a neatly packaged up, super concise way for your sales team to provide that information to a buyer when they need it to be able to make an educated decision, right? It's like, that's the function of the blog article.
Yeah.
There's a ton of other discovery methods for that stuff, right? If you're into Instagram and if your audience is on Instagram, Reels is a phenomenal discovery mechanism. YouTube Shorts is a phenomenal discovery mechanism. There's so many different ways for you to package up the big five and put it in places that your buyers are so that they can find it super, super easily.
And we should probably put in the show notes or something about learning centers and the importance of those. We at Impact, like I just said, having a blog on your website is so 2001. That ain't where you should have your stuff, right? Put it in a learning center. It's basically just a different way of formatting a blog. It's just not chronological, and it helps people actually find the information that they want at the right time. There's a right and a wrong way to do it. So great questions today. Great discussion today. Thank you all for being here. Take care, everybody.